I want to be the Theodor Herzl of a new state, a resurrection of an ancient Greek city, complete with the language and everything. When you look at Israel as a role play of antiquity, and that word is used a lot now, LARPing, live action role playing, as if it's a bad thing. I think it's a good thing. A lot of actually Western and European history is LARPing, especially of Rome, less so of Greece, but especially of Rome. Washington, D.C. is built according to Roman city models, Roman architecture, Roman political standards, and they did not go all the way and resurrect Roman identity, certainly, but not even the Latin language. I would like that very much, even though you can dispute, for example, how much really of antiquity is reborn with Israel as a state. Can you resurrect the Hittite state? And I don't think very much at all in the end. Nevertheless, as an attempt to resurrect biblical state, even in symbol, whatever your opinions pro and con in the world of day-to-day politics now, this year you have heard a lot, Zionism this, Zionism that. It turned out to be a complete dud in this election. All the retards on the left and some on the right who predicted that Israel was Israel versus the Palestinians, as if the conflict of tiny peoples in the Middle East was supposed to determine American election. Well, American voters didn't think so at all. Although it's good, maybe I was looking at leftard accounts, trying to attack them. I had made this list to attack them from before October 7th, and I was putting it off, and I was trying to gear my energies to, because I love combat, and I wanted to attack the left. But then, when I look at this list, after October 7th of last year, 95% of their content is Israel-Palestine. They're complete obsessed with that. So I couldn't use this list because that issue doesn't interest me. But you have to say, at least it maybe demotivated the left from voting and contributed to Kamala's loss. It's quite funny, though, that in Michigan the Muslims turned out for Trump because guess what? With all the stupid propaganda you've seen of Trump is a Zionist and this, which he's not. But it turns out that there is no non-Zionist political faction in American politics today. And the Muslims in Michigan saw that. The Kamala Biden regime, call it what you want, was just as Zionist as anybody else, and so they will go for Trump. Maybe he changed things. I think is interesting that everyone on all sides has high hopes for Trump administration. Both Russia and Ukraine has high hope for this. Anyway, I want to go back to talk about resurrection of ancient states. Whatever, again, your opinions, pro-Israel, pro-Palestinians, whatever, it doesn't matter. You have to admit, as a historical project, Foundation of Israel is a wild, adventurous, it's a great undertaking in the modern world in the same way that ISIS and other forms attempt to resurrect caliphate. That also is kind of a wild, amazing idea for the Muslim side. The Palestinians, I would respect more if they really wanted to LARP as Philistines. They should readopt ancient Indo-European rights if they want to go that way. I don't know, but they hope. I mean, the caliphate thing, the ISIS people. Yes, it's different because they hope for worldwide dominion, but it doesn't matter. I'm talking just a naive, enthusiastic attempt to resurrect some ancient form of not just political, but even social, moral organization like this, even maybe the language. We want Khalifa now, that kind of thing. And I know from friends a similar idea who are French monarchists who wish for the return of the king in Versailles. And they want an absolute monarchy with the church at its side, not just a kind of constitutional symbol. You know, they want the return in Versailles. And they say, they use the same example I do, is say if the Jews could wait 2,000 years for Israel to come back, we can wait and fight and persevere a few more 100 years for the return of our king. I love this ambition, this drive to refound. Of course, in the case of the Jews, it was not the religious Jews who were saying next year in Jerusalem. They were saying that for centuries, and nothing ever happened. It was the secular ones in the 19th century and early 20th who went ahead and actually did it. they actually ignoring, the Jews who are cucked by their rabbi priests in the same way that Christians are cucked by their priests historically, I mean. And it is not the religious cucked by rabbi Jews who founded it. It was the secularist Jews with men like Theodor Herzl providing the ideological, theoretical and motivational base for doing this. And they had to throw off the rule of priests before they could do any of this at all. In their case, rabbis, same thing. But I like this spirit in all things. It's something great to pursue in a world that's moribund and petty. These kind of antiquity revival project, the resurrection of old forms. And for me, one day to be a kind of Theodor Herzl of a city-state where the ancient Greek language is resurrected in spoken word, ancient Greek principles of life also, the agon or the contest as the basis of life. I don't want to say a constitution, that word overused now, but in the constitution in the ancient sense, a day-to-day basis for life, the contest as an organizing principle of state, an aristocratic military republic living under a type of law like that of Lycurgus from Sparta, an updated form of that kind of Sparta. You read the Nietzsche essay on the Greek state, which he wrote, I think he was 28 years old, but he never published it. But you can find it online if you want to see what I have in mind. Something like that, and also an updated form of the Greek religion. Not so much religion, as I don't think the old gods are awake. You can't make people believe today in any case. I don't think you should try to. And I agree with my friend, the city bureaucrat, when he say some things can survive cynicism. Those things are worthwhile. Everything should be put through the prism or the what do you call it, the gang, where you pass a corridor where everyone is hitting you. It's not called gang rape. What is it called? But yes, everything should be gang raped, gang banged, gang raped by cynicism. And anything that can survive the caustic modern cynicism and skepticism, that deserves to survive. Anything that can't come out of that probably doesn't. And physiology, for example, can survive that. You can't cynicize and skepticize and be irony too much about physical beauty. That's one thing that survives all attempts at bringing it down like that. But astrology, on the other hand, probably can't survive that. Religion, mysticism, I don't think can survive that. In general, high-flown bullshit principles can't. And certainly I claim that no gods, ancient or modern, can, but an updated form of the Greek religion, something secularized, and the Greek language in all its beauty with pitch accent pronunciation. Should I start half-hour tier on this show weekly where I read ancient Greek, drunk? Maybe I will do that. But maybe I will charge $7,000 a month for it. What do you think? But yes, this is worth resurrecting, and this can survive cynicism. And when I say secularized, I mean some of the principles behind some of unusual ancient Greek cults. Again, not the religion itself, but let's say a doctrine may be driven by Heraclitean a public and more modernized Heraclitean, somewhat simplified doctrine that is in keeping with modern science and, more important, just with day-to-day observation available to any man. I try to do some of this in my book, but that's not really a public, that not really a public manifesto document. That was more a short, intimate text I intended for distribution among friends. This would be something much more of public program. With a procession, muscular men will hold the bust of Heraclitus in procession at the head of mechanized columns of soldiers in parade. Yes, Heraclitus as the prophet of a state in much the same way that Pelopidas and Epaminondas in the 300s BC, they reformed Thebes, the Greek city-state Thebes, on the basis of the philosopher Pythagoras, in much that way, with worship of public nudity and such, and laws and things. By things I mean festivals and images reborn in public that you would have never thought to see again. It will shock the world. This is what I wanted. I was thinking of the relative advantages and the difficulties and advantages my ambition has as opposed to something like Herzl's and of the Zionists who succeeded in founding Israel. And I think if you weigh it on both sides, this is very interesting. This may be of interest, what I talk now, also to various others who I know are thinking about, or some already trying to found new voluntary communities, they call it, of various kinds. And I think the big difference though, between what I want and what they want, I will not name them. You will have surely heard attempts to found charter cities and semi-independent autonomous charter cities and this kind of thing. But I don't think the others who are trying this, well, I'm not trying it for now, I'm just talking about it, but the others don't have a good feeling for the necessities of sovereignty and the need to be independent of any other state power. To me, if you don't achieve that, this is not worth doing. The need to be able to resist a state physically if you have to. And they forget that living in a city or a community, I hate this word, but a community like what they have in mind, that kind of life, the good life, is the wages and reward of victory. But that will probably not come in your lifetime if you're serious about it. Because there is conspiracy of interests arrayed against you today if you try to do this. So actually, if you have such an aim now, you can only hope for a lifetime of war, of conflict. You won't have good life that Aristotle talks about. You know, he say the city comes into being for survival, but continues existing for the good life. But you will not achieve that in a city today. You will only have war trying to found your city. It won't be allowed to come about, not as a general rule. So they are geared for living in peace. They are not oriented and organized for war, so they will lose. And by war, I mean in particular covert mafia war, since you won't actually have the numbers and material to have direct war, not with any major state today. And so it has to be covert. And this case also for, let's say, a Zionist in the year 1899 or something like that, if you started around then, there would have been for you to look ahead just constant war, struggles, skirmishes. There was physical warfare in that area also throughout into the 1940s. There were wonderful small-scale skirmishes throughout the whole Canaan area. And of course, there was a huge war then in 47 or 48 when independence was declared. And in this case, in our time, I mean, you could choose a better site, and you would not have to be faced down by natives necessarily resisting you in the area. On the other hand, colonialism in 1900 was the rule of the day. Today it's not acceptable, so you have that going against you. But you would actually have then the entire world against you if you tried something like what I propose. Even if you choose a relatively empty area and get the consent of, let's say, the local state, they may even invite you. They would see it as a way to prosperity. But they would think they could tax you or you would bring commerce or something if you were successful. But I think very quickly you'd have the entire world against you. It would take a great deal of wiliness, luck also to get it done. For the libertarianish projects that have been suggested, I don't want to name them. Good luck to all of them. Look, I'll name them. Okay, there's Praxis, right? Everyone knows that. But there are others too. My advice to them long ago would have been to erase any reference whatsoever to anything dissident coded or rightish coded, because it's that, most of all, that will turn the world against you, including even cryptocurrency. Don't call yourselves crypto bros. That has connotations of governments don't like that. Establishment doesn't like that today. So if you give, just to give you an idea of the challenges, let's say you are planning to found a city in a part of the world that has good weather, that is easily accessible from land, that is already in, let's say, an inhabited, owned part of the world, which I do not know if they made this public. I've not been following Praxis back and forth, and I'll be discreet. But I think I'm not being too indiscreet to say they were planning something like what I just said. A city in a good part of the world, let's say, with good weather. There are other cities around it and so on, in a quite accessible part of the world. And I told them that's a mistake. You should choose Iceland because it's cold. It's inaccessible island. And all that would have to happen if you are a leftist is if the city is in an accessible part of the world, you arrange a caravan of homeless They will trickle into your new city over land. They will be able to do this if you are planning to do it in a liberal type aligned city, let's say. If you choose, on the other hand, to do it in the territory of an authoritarian state, there are other big risks that come to you. But let's say you choose in a relatively liberal part of the world, something aligned that depends on its existence for public opinion in America and so on, where a leftist can organize caravan of homeless. They will trickle in over land. And then even if you use third-party security to remove this infestation, they will place cameras and so on and selectively edit and say, oh, look, it's Nazis. They're mistreating poor people. They're putting down these good people in violation of international human rights, you know. So then you would have to choose between being infested with homeless or being demonized. And then local governments will say, this is too much of a liability. You are attracting bad attention. You're attracting trouble. Maybe they will not renew your charter or give you worse terms or whatever. Then another vulnerability, do you plan to let in women? Because that's something else I would do if I was a leftist. I would send leftist women and I'll start all kinds of sexual harassment proceedings, maybe after a year or this. And if the country you are in doesn't make those kinds of proceedings easy, I'd have the women start them in the home countries of the people trying to make the city, like they did to Julian Assange, you know. And this is also why the conservative dating app I've heard of is so stupid. There was a dating app suggested a while ago, and besides the fact that they used a fat pork's woman to advertise it, but even if it had been well done from that point of view, if I were a leftist girl, it's a conservative, it's an app for dating for conservatives to meet, I would go there. I pretend to be a conservative. I'd get all kinds of embarrassing video and such of conservative men. I'd make a compilation, many such things. So, you know, what I'm saying here is actually, despite this election victory, I want to remind people we are very much in minority and we are in very weak position. Trump is actually in a weak position too. As I record this, Gates, his nominee for Attorney General, has just withdrawn his nomination. I don't want to make this show about politics, but very quickly, I was expecting that Gates would be appointed under some kind of recess anyway. I don't think they could have gotten votes because so many Republican senator cucks will not vote for Trump appointments, and there's nothing really you can do to force them. You'd have to promise them concessions, which may even be worse. So he has to find some way to do it under recess appointments. But whatever he does, this is a long fight, and we are very much minority. We are surrounded by enemies, weak position, and this kind of anything you do publicly is going to be attacked if it has a tinge of this. And these independent living community projects, you know, and they aren't even like, oh, it's Colonia Dignidad in Chile, which was like SS men from Germany founding some compound in the Andes Mountains in Chile. Okay, so that was, you know, that's one of the examples used by the left of, oh, that's a Nazi colony or such. But this is not like some SS Nazi colony, right? They are just, in many cases, mild libertarianish guys that being crypto bros or Bitcoin associated. But anything like that, we say you want voluntary communities based on that or that represent exit or independence, even just doing that is enough to make you a target. So any public organization that is right-coded will be target. And the moment you don't really have legal countermeasures. So what you have to do instead is use a lot of tact and go very deep into hiding. You have to do it from a position of hiding. So my advice for something like Praxis, I can tell it to you now because it's too late for them. There was already New York Times articles against the founders and so on. But if any of you want to try something similar in the future, do not code it as anything based or right-wing or whatever and put frontmen who are of clean past, who are not detectable. You don't want to get dissident-based points and get retweets online. You don't want to appear that way. Just say, for example, You want an environmental protection organization, protection of forests. We want to protect the green forests of northwestern Spain in Galicia. And we are into urban renewal. And, because there are medieval villages there that are abandoned. So you hear sometimes you can buy a whole village in Spain for $30,000. Don't get your hopes up when you hear that. It's an uninhabitable dump. Like, the houses are 500-year-old, mostly musty ruins out of, Lord of the Rings with things crawling all inside them. You don't want that. But that would be a good site for environmental protection and urban renewal. And a right-wing organization, if it was tactful and maintained discipline, it could advance under that pretense. Similar to how I have encouraged others now to take up cause of animal rights, which the left has shamefully abandoned. And these are all unimpeachable fronts. And your situation, by the way, is not similar to the right wing in the Weimar Republic, which had social opinion on its side and the judiciary on its side and law enforcement on its side. Now all of that is against us. But even the Weimar far right was more tactful than a lot of these people. The Weimar far right, the cover organization for a very extreme group called Organization Consul, who I cannot even say on this show what they did. You can look up what they did. But their front organization was, I believe, called Sportverein Olympia. It was a sports goods and gyms store and type of organization. That was their cover. And they also had like a woodworking type of front. They were not trying to get dissident points, a retweet from Pakistani or this, they were trying to achieve something politically. And I've recommended the animal protection thing to a number of even the art people hovering around us, some of who are actually friendly leftists, because first of all, it's a good cause as such. I am genuinely for animal rights, and it's very bad that the left has abandoned this. I hope RFK Jr., he perseveres, he comes into administration, and he tackles also this front. But it is a great cover for informal organization, which at this point, in my opinion, you still cannot openly organize against anything overtly right-wing, at the very least for fear of highly limiting the futures of your members. But anyway, this is how I thought about the question of founding your own city. And I was taken aback when I told others who are planning these communities, I don't like that word, right? Because it overlooks the political question. It's not community, it's a state you're talking about. I'm talking that has to remain central. Are you dependent on others for your security? Are you sovereign or not? And I noticed that connected with their overlooking this question, they were never geared, they were never organized for conflict, the conflict that would inevitably come about. But I would be, and I realized that such a city as I have in mind will, I'm sorry to say, will never be secure without nuclear weapons. And so the pursuit of nuclear weapons has to be, I think, essential, because that way you will not have America or France coming at you saying you cannot do this. See, the restart of life, and that's what I'm talking about, the restart of life in the real sense, that has been smothered by the Pax Americana. Anytime Bob Denard or such, he tried to take over the Comoros Islands in Africa, or the Seychelles, or things like this. There have been other attempts, and every time it's America, England, and France, these powers come in and stop you. Imagine I try to make this state, and America will say, no, you can't do this, you're infringing human rights, you cannot build that laboratory, you cannot do these things, don't build that lab, you can't treat these people this way or whatever. But these are practical details in which, again, if you compare to Theodor Herzl and other Zionist situation in they are trying to refound Israel, you have certain advantages. You do have certain advantages technically. For one, it's the flexibility in location. Second of all, the technology now, some say you can do these things faster and better. For example, Bitcoin, other cryptocurrency would be, you'd have an independent currency. You wouldn't need to depend on a large state. Then there is a possibility of drones, these other kind of numbers boosting technologies to take care of your defenses. Although I think it remains to be seen if small numbers of soldiers, highly trained, can resist big armies with help of drone swarms and such. I think it's still too soon to say, still theoretical. Against a determined foe who would take kid gloves off with you, I don't know if you can resist that way. Let's see. But there are such advantages that exist today. You have the internet to organize and so forth. Travel is much easier, of course. And then the most interesting difference and the big advantage, though, that the Zionists had is, well, they already had a people, right? And that people was in a situation where solution of an independent state became increasingly attractive. Whereas now, you would be faced with the task of creating an identity that is strong enough bond as a people or as a race, incredibly difficult. The most difficult question politically, something that can become so. And to give people who willingly choose it enough of a reason to live together permanently. And that difficulty outweighs, I think, all the material and technical advantage that you might have now. Which with one important exception. And I'll talk this now. Excuse me, but this is interesting. But this interesting debates about why Zionism came about in the first place and why the need or not the need for an independent state today, how it differs. But there's one advantage in this. Let's use libtard office language, community creation, where you could have an advantage maybe today over something like Theodor Herzl. But why, before I talk that, why did Herzl and the Zionists see the creation of Israel as necessary? The reason was for it to be a homeland for the rank-and-file Jews, not the elite Jews. That is forgotten by many now on all sides of the arguments. A lot of Zionist fervor and agitation was based on this premise, though. And it undermines somewhat the myth of Jewish unity that the rabbis, for example, have always promoted. So they're trying to kind of sweep this under the rug. They're promoting this in Israel now. And by the way, covertly, I believe they're promoting it online too with the kind of fake mainstream, fake minstrel anti-Semitism that you've been seeing for the last year or two online, which I believe is all coming out of Haifa, Israel, or something like that. But that's for later. But also the supposed unity between Jewish rank and file and Jewish elite, which historically was the Zionists rejected this because the Jewish elite had often used the common Jews as human shields. And it was the Jewish elite that was highly mobile and could escape the consequences of their, let's say, bad behavior, whereas the Jewish rank and file, the Jewish common man, could not escape that. So a good example that's very old is the Khmelnytsky uprising in Ukraine in the 1600s. The Cossacks and the Ukrainian peasants arose against their Polish landowners, including, let's say, the elite among the Jews in the area who had been used by the Polish landowners as arrendators or tax collectors and such. And they were often given tyrannical powers to tax farms. So they were highly resented for good reason by the Ukrainian peasantry who was oppressed by them and the Polish overlords. So it was a typical peasant revolt led by Cossacks. And the Cossack leader gave the Jews in the area the option to evacuate, actually. But he only gave this option to the common Jews, the rank-and-file Jews, not to their leaders. He said, you can leave, the Jewish people can leave, but you have to leave your leaders, and I'm going to kill them. And he was planning to massacre them and also massacre the Polish nobility in that area. And I keep going on tangents, but it's interesting. The Polish nobility, the Leks, they call themselves. You've heard the name Lech Walesa. Well, Lech is what the Polish nobility called themselves. They had such a conception of themselves as essentially different people from the Polish serf, the Polish commoner. And certainly all European nobility more or less did. When Gobineau talks about how the French elite saw itself as essentially a different nation from the French serfs, he wasn't just inventing that. That was a reflection, an accurate reflection of how many European nobles felt that they were essentially a different people from the commoners that they ruled. But it was so exaggerated among the Leks or the Polish nobles that there are theories now, mainstream historian theories, that they may very well have been a different people who had ruled the common the people in that area, the Slavs, in some form of elite dominance, that they had come in from Siberia, or that they were actually some kind of Sarmatian nobility that had grafted itself on top of the population somehow, because their self-conception was just so outlandish, even by European standards, that they saw themselves as different from their serfs. But anyway, they certainly did role play as Sarmatians, by the way. That's a good thing. The Polish cavalry who broke the siege of Vienna, they had Sarmatian wings on their back. It's very nice. But what happened was the Jewish leaders did not allow. They turned down Khmelnytsky's offer, and they didn't allow the common people to evacuate. And so although the Jewish commoners would have been saved, but the Jewish leadership essentially used them as human shields. So a lot ended up getting massacred. And this pattern, this phenomenon I've just talked now, it kept repeating throughout Jewish history, including, I'm sorry to say, but in World War II, Papa Hitler let all the Jewish elite left escape, and the ones who got killed were the Jewish tailors from villages in outside Minsk or something who had nothing to do with the abuses of the Jewish communist left in Germany in the 1920s, and who were, I think, the real instigators and the provokers of the Holocaust. And whether you agree with what I just said or no, this was actually the right-wing Zionist line about what happened at that time. And also it was their line about what had happened previously time and again in Jewish history. And so they founded the state as a refuge specifically for the rank-and-file Jew, not the elite Jew. And it's interesting how this debate of that time had maps over to, Nietzsche has some nice lines, which I don't think many casual readers of Nietzsche realize this. But Nietzsche, when he talks not only about the Jews, but when he talks about the Jews sometimes, he's doing the typical European aristo thing that the Japanese also do sometimes, where they're mocking you, but they're doing it in a way they give you obviously exaggerated compliments, and through that they mock you. And I think that most casual readers of Nietzsche don't get that. They see a line from Nietzsche out of context, and they don't see what he's really doing. Now, Leo Strauss, to his credit, doesn't fall for it, or not completely. He sees that Nietzsche is kind of backhanded complimenting the Jews, and then he's following it up with his own solution. I mean, Nietzsche's own solution, which Nietzsche's solution was essentially for the Jews to disappear through intermixing with the Europeans, which this is the limit solution for blacks, right? Search limit if interested. Limit, the famous posters, the cockskin schizophrenic poster. But his solution was for blacks to be fucked out of existence, on account of which, or to support this claim, Limit believed that racism needs to end because racism is holding off the genocide of the black race through intermixing. So it's funny, but remember, he was schizophrenic and he genuinely believed that only 40,000 people lived in Africa and so on. So, okay, in reality, if you pursued that option, it would be a bit different. But the Limit option that I just mentioned, it would have done that to the Jews if it was tried. In fact, you will often read kvetching and hand-wringing articles from Jews deploring intermarriage and such, that the Jews are being killed through kindness, through just being absorbed in this way. But they would have just disappeared as a people with their own separate identity through this means of intermixing with Europeans, I think. And this is not entirely a welcome prospect to a Jewish nationalist or any such. Okay, but it's an interesting question, Nietzsche's opinions on this, because actually they mirror Limit, the schizophrenic poster I said, in the sense that Nietzsche also believed loudmouth anti-Semitism of the kind that existed as a movement in Europe in the late 1870s and 1880s, starting in the 1870s, but he believed this was bad because it was an obstacle to getting rid of the Jews in this way by assimilation and intermixing. So if you're curious about these opinions, you can read the book by one Holub, who I mentioned already. But look, I need a break, drink nice green tea milks, and I'll be right back briefly to tell you about this book and further debates around Zionism in the late 19th, early 20th century, because I think direct relevant to anyone try to found a new state of any type today. I will be right back. I need green teas. So yes, this book by Holub on Nietzsche is his position with respect to the Jews, which I'm bringing up now because, again, I won't tell you about debates, situation in late 19th century, just as Zionism was taking off, what matters were in dispute, and how this differed from any potential new state foundation project today. But this book is called Nietzsche's Jewish Problem by Holub. It's not special. It's obviously, I think, just his thesis or an academic's book. It's kind of one note and repetitive. But it does go away to arguing against certain commonly held misconceptions about Nietzsche's opinion on the Jews. You may have read some come from Jews who are proud that Nietzsche praises them and so on. But Holub maintains that Nietzsche held lifelong anti-Jewish views and that it was not his sister's corruption or distortion of materials that was responsible for later understanding of Nietzsche as a proto-Nazi or as anti-Jewish thinker. In fact, he shows this myth was invented really just out of his no factual basis. It's a creation of people like Walter Kaufmann, who was trying to rehabilitate Nietzsche after World War II for Anglo audiences. And so he invented, and others like him invented this idea that, oh no, it's really Nietzsche's sister who corrupted some of his notes and letters and compiled them in such a way to make it look like he was more Nazi than he was. But actually, that not true at all, and Nazis saw kinship in Nietzsche based on his own writings, not his notes, his published writings during his life, which if you take certain passages from Genealogy of Morals, especially the supposedly anti-Christian ones, yes, they're anti-Christian, they're not just anti-Christians, including those from the Antichrist, they are actually the most anti-Jewish things ever written, and they were recognized as such by Nietzsche's own friends like Franz Overbeck during his life, and Nazi theorists recognized them as such. And the task being then to eliminate biblical influence from Europe and from European morality totally and completely. But he showed in multiple ways, including letters, and how although Nietzsche had the Jewish friends and he was not a bigot, and so far he had quite subtle opinions and ideas about them. He was not one note, but nevertheless he held throughout his life what would be today called anti-Semitic or anti-Jewish views, and indeed maybe presented one of the greatest assaults on the Jewish idea of the world ever, the spiritual idea, that Jewish spiritual idea of the world, and that his attack on anti-Semites, which is also very obvious in his writings, but that this was directed at only in that time anti-Semite had a particular meaning. It didn't refer as it does to all the things it does today. It referred to a particular political movement with particular tactics, and for Nietzsche this was actually bound up with personal questions as well, because he believed the stench of these people, they had a bad reputation as anarchical boors and so on, and that it became associated with his name because his sole publisher for a while had been also a publisher of prominent anti-Semitic texts, and Nietzsche believed this smeared him, it hurt his name and reputation and so on. But actually, since the days of his acquaintance with Wagner, just speaking on this, it was Wagner and his wife who had warned Nietzsche to be more discreet about attacking Jews openly, which Nietzsche had done in a public lecture in the 1870s. Now think about that for a moment. It's Wagner telling you have to tone it down a bit, and or you'll hurt your career, and we need you to be the respectable academic face of what we're trying to do. But in his attack on the anti-Semites, however, in Nietzsche, it actually was not just for cover. He did indeed hate the prominent anti-Semites of his own time, and it wasn't also just for personal reasons, but it was also not because he supported the idea of religious tolerance, or that he had good opinions about the Jews or such things, or what was in the Bible, or any other such. It was more because he thought these anti-Semites were retarded, and what he objected most to in their views was their socialism. They held a kind of wholesome Chungus prig moralizing. So if you read in the Genealogy of Morals, his attack in the third essay, his attack on Eugene Düring, I may have read part or even a longer version of this passage on this show before. It's in the middle of Nietzsche's, one of his classic explanations of leftist religious ressentiment and of the pathological drive to revenge of the sick in spirit. And he represents Dühring also as this, as the apostle of revenge. I read for you now. Take a look into the background of every family, every corporation, every community. Everywhere you see the struggle of the sick against the healthy. A quiet struggle for the most part, with a little poison powder, with needling, with deceitful expressions of long suffering. But now and then also with that sick man's Pharisaic tactic of loud gestures, whose favorite role is noble indignation. It likes to make itself heard all the way into the consecrated rooms of science, that hoarse, booming indignation of the pathologically ill hound, the biting insincerity and rage of such noble Pharisees. Once again, I remind readers who have ears of Eugene Dühring, that apostle of revenge from Berlin, who in today's Germany makes the most indecent and most revolting use of moralistic gibberish. Dühring, the preeminent moral braggart we have nowadays, even among those like him, the anti-Semites. So, an end quote. By the way, please, to all of you who keep talking about Nietzsche's attack on this or that, or on what means ressentiment, just go back and read the third essay. Actually, read the whole book, but read the third essay in Genealogy of Morals. It's amazing to me. People sometimes invoke Nietzsche as if he's saying that he wishes people like what I just read about for you now would be more violent or more assertive. The point of slave morality or such it isn't that it's soft or too nice. That is not what Nietzsche is saying, or that he would like it if they were more violent or something like that. That's not what means. What means is what I just read. And more. Go read it. But anyway, Nietzsche does not reject the anti-Semites of his time because they had bad opinion of Jews, or for the sake of liberal inclusion, or religious or ethnic tolerance, or any other such reasons, multiculturalism or what have you, or even actually out of any good feelings for the Jews, because he continues to attack both the Jews around Jesus' time and the Jews of his own time. Throughout his life, he attacks them. But he just saw their method as something that would fail and would prevent a more tactful solution. And again, he saw them as primarily a rabble-rousing, left-wing socialist movement, which they were in his time. That's what the anti-Semitic movement was in his time. And it's interesting that Dühring is also mentioned by Engels, of Marx and Engels, Friedrich Engels. He has a famous text called Anti-Dühring, which was very popular with communists and still is, but it was throughout communist history, classic communist history. It was a very popular text. And I'm not saying you should read this, it's quite tedious. I certainly didn't read every line, but if you skim it, you'll see Engels is not attacking Dühring because of his anti-Semitism. I don't even, maybe he mentions it, but it's only incidental or a side point. He understands Dühring as primarily a socialist thinker and a challenger to Marx. They disagreed about what socialism meant. Dühring disagreed with this idea of class conflict. They had a different take on human nature and on many other things that socialists disagree with each other on. But he was primarily understood, as was the rest of the anti-Semitic movement, as a left-wing type of socialist, wholesome chungus, like communitarian, moralistic socialism, let's say, concerned with social justice and exploitation and this other kind of thing. And it's that element, not the Jewish one way or another as such, it's that element that Nietzsche objected to. And it's also interesting in context of what I talk on this episode that Theodor Herzl, supposedly I say, this same man Nietzsche attacks, Eugene Dühring, is who convinced Theodor Herzl that assimilation was no longer a path for the Jews in Europe, because Dühring had turned it into a racial question. He was I don't think he was actually the first one, because Gobineau had certainly talked about the Jews in a racial context before, but Gobineau actually had quite positive opinion of the Jews. But Dühring turned it from one of belief or culture or religion into this racial question around which there was no way out. There would be only murder or expulsion as a solution. So I say that it's interesting that it's this figure that was the impetus for someone like Herzl to push for Zionism, for separation, for leaving Europe and so on. Because again, regarding the solution of assimilation, Leo Strauss points out, and may be correct, that Nietzsche's hope for assimilation could only ever appeal or work with the Jewish elite. And by that is meant not just the social, political or financial elite of the Jews or such, but even, let's say, if you take the top 10% of the Jews of that time in intelligence and culture, or potentially so. That is what Strauss essentially, I think, in what I'm about to read for you, that's what he and other Zionists believed. Yes, they could assimilate, but the rest of the Jews, there are many rank-and-file Jews who could not, because in Strauss' own saying, they are too boorish, too average, or too whatever. As in any population, the mass of people is just at best average, and they would not be able to integrate with the Europeans or assimilate, or they could not do so in any way that was not completely humiliating to themselves, Strauss says. Right? If you are Wittgenstein, or not even that level, but something like that, you can assimilate on a relative equality into European society. If you're Marcel Proust, maybe you can. But if you're a shoe cobbler from Borodrich shtetl on edge of Belarus or whatever, average intelligence, will probably not be able to, Strauss is saying. And Israel was intended as a solution for this, for the Jewish people in its average form, let's say, or as a method, an alternative side of what I'm saying is a method of purification for the Jewish people so that they could shed many of their bad qualities. Nietzsche lists some of their bad qualities that they would have to shed in order to assimilate and fully join European society. And these qualities, actually, the earliest Zionists completely accepted them, to the point where the Jewish left considers the early Zionists and even Herzl to be functionally anti-Semitic, to have accepted anti-Semitic judgment about what the Jew in the diaspora or in Europe was. But the early Zionists, this is what they believed, that the Jew had become a kind of deformed creature living as he did in Europe, a kind of neurotic Woody Allen kind of, with all the bad qualities attributed to Jews by stereotype, which Nietzsche, by the way, believed applied also to the anti-Semites. They were kind of spiritually Jewish in their judgments and their rancor and so forth. But that the point of Israel was that the Jews would be purified of these qualities and would become like other nations by living in their own land. So I will read for you now. It's a somewhat subtle argument Strauss is making, because he doesn't seem to be sure if Nietzsche's trolling, So I will read some passages from his relevant lecture on this. Nietzsche's analysis regarding the assimilation of the Jews into Europe, he's saying. Nietzsche's analysis has some defects, though. His statement, which is almost dithyrambic, is based on very deep analysis, perhaps on the deepest analysis ever made of what assimilation could possibly mean. Now, the most patent defect of Nietzsche's analysis seems to be this: the regeneration or cleansing which he has in mind as